welcome back everyone. This week we're going to dissect an extract from Alexander Pope's poem, Epistle to Dr Arbuthnot. Alexander Pope is regarded as one of the greatest English poets of the early 18th century and is best known for his satirical and extensive poetry, including Epistle to Dr Arbuthnot, and is specialised in attacking corrupt politicians, lousy poets and even the king. Pope published the poem in January 1735 and is addressed to Pope's friend, John Arbuthnot, a Scottish physician and satirist, after Pope learnt that Arbuthnot was dying. Pope spent the poem apologising but mainly defending his work against his attacks on other writers, such as Lord Hervey, in the genre of satire. Pope views Hervey as a man who will say and write anything to please other people and values glamour and social climbing, all traits Pope does not agree with, and he criticises in the extract of the poem. Through the epistle, the tone stays the same, mainly of antagonism and resentment of Hervey. Literary devices such as imagery, allusion, rhyming and satire all assist in creating a memorial for his friendship with Dr Arbuthnot and message of Pope's moral outrage of his fellow fame-seeking writers. Throughout the epistle, there are many examples of imagery that are shown.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, within this excerpt of Pope's epistle, there are several instances of imagery. Imagery is the use of figurative language to create a visual representation or associated feeling in the mind of the audience. Specifically, we will be looking at the animal imagery implemented and how it conveys Pope's moral distaste for his peers. The excerpt is from lines 305 to 333 and is a direct satirical dressing down of who is referred to as Sporus, and with context, we know this is aimed at Lord Hervey. Within this portrait, Pope likens he and his personality to lowly animals. The statements mock and portray Hervey as lacking substance and moral. An example of this is in lines 309 and 310. Yet let me flap this bug with gilded wings, this painted child of dirt that stinks and stings. The animal imagery here starts in the first line, which implies his target is a bug easily swatted. A bug that's in the dirt. It stinks, it stings. The imagery associates a harsh and unsavory picture with the target. Pope writes in a way that looks down on the subject and highlights their insignificance. In turn, this unconsciously elevates Pope's position in the mind of the reader. He is the one doing the swatting, making his position miles higher. Another thing to look at is the term gilded, coating something in a thin layer of gold. If a bug's wings are covered in gold, it is beautiful but useless. Switching this imagery to human subjects, a gilded butterfly is a person who has wealth and beauty but lacks much else. Pope excels at weaving his message and purpose into the mocking tone of his portrait of Lord Hervey. Another example is within lines 319 and 320. Or at the ear of Eve, familiar toad, half froth, half venom, spits himself abroad. Likening his target to a toad, he once again uses harsh animal imagery to give his opinion and paint a sordid portrait of Hervey's actions and self. Froth could mean of little substance, while venom is likely his words. Animal traits continue as he says he spits himself like a poisonous animal in defense. Throughout the text, we are shown that Pope thinks Hervey to be eager to please with false airs and fake cajoling words as he writes, easily backed up with this interpretation of these lines. But how does this show Pope's moral outrage of his fellow fame-seeking writers? Well, earlier it was said that Lord Hervey was one of the peers that had attacked Pope and his work. As we know, the aim of this epistle was to prove to his dying friend, among others, he was more than capable of defending himself as he satirized obvious high-ranking targets, as well as pursue the writers at his level he considered morally degenerate. Lines 305 to 333 focus on Lord Hervey and pick apart his morality and personality using some of the most biting and insulting imagery possible. It can be interpreted that he does this as an example of his capabilities in satire and as a direct response attacking personality of someone who had ridiculed Pope. From the use of animal imagery to paint a picture of Hervey's actions and character, Pope also uses allusion to satirize what would be considered for the time period his personal immoral tendency.
Throughout the epistle, there are constant allusions made in regard to Lord Hervey's sexual orientation and his biological sexuality. Allusion is a literary device in which the speaker refers either directly or indirectly to a person, place, or thing. Allusion can provide clarity or identify hidden information or meaning. One of their many examples can include his wit all seesaw between that and this, now high, now low, now master up, now miss. These two lines show the confusion with Hervey's sexuality, comparing his sense of gender to a seesaw. This in turn alluded to Hervey liking both men and women, or Pope questioning his gender. Alexander Pope also painted a vindictive portrait of Hervey being a eunuch throughout his work. Other examples of this consist of Amphibious thing that acting either part, and fop at the toilet, flatterer at the board, now trips a lady and now struts a lord. This alluding to Lord Hervey's inaccurate and varying opinions and recounts in his literature, or again, his sexuality being with both ladies and lords. Pope could also be alluding to Hervey being a lady and a lord, since Pope believed Hervey was a eunuch. Pope compares Hervey to a puppet in the line, "And as the prompter breathes, the puppet squeaks." This arguably being a metaphor for Hervey being a eunuch, since puppets don't have a lower half, they are absent of any definitive sex. Pope also compares him to a reptile in the line, "A cherub's face, a reptile all the rest." He ultimately states that Hervey has the face of a human, but his body is like a reptile, alluding to the fact that reptiles shift gender. It's also a double entendre for calling him a snake. Pope disempowers Lord Hervey and a group of people on these allusions, but still confirms the dominant views of England in the 1700s. Relationships other than male to female were viewed as vile, unnatural, and something to be hated and killed for. Pope proves this through identifying Hervey as a vile antithesis, meaning he is vile and opposite to what he appears to be. Pope's allusions create depth, just like his choices in his rhyming scheme.
Within any poetry, formal or free verse, rhyme scheme is a useful literary device in the construction of text. Its main use is to create flow, rhythm, and balance the overall poem. The excerpt, for the most part, follows a mock heroic couplet scheme. These are two-line stanzas with an AA rhyme scheme, and the lines are in iambic pentameter. Also, as it is mock heroic, the poem is a satirical take on the heroic or epic poem. Grandiose themes are often highly exaggerated, and a fool is placed where the hero would be. The couplet scheme is easily recognizable in the text, for example, "So well-bred spaniels civilly delight, in mumbling of the game they dare not bite. Eternal smiles his emptiness betray, as shallow streams run dimpling all the way." This literary device creates a flowing rhythm in the text and successfully meshes ideas with more detail and direction. However, it is also possible to break the balance and draw the reader to specific stanzas using the conventions of the rhyme scheme. This is evident in lines 323 and to 325. His wit all seesaw between that and this, now high, now low, now master up, now miss, and he himself one vile antithesis. This is an example of a triplet stanza. As the name suggests, it contains 3 lines with an AAA rhyme scheme. This break from the couplet scheme that makes up the majority of the excerpt really highlights these lines. It's possible that Pope does this to show the audience that he feels this stanza is really worth the attention. It is part of his scathing attack on what he sees as immoral and needs to fight against as a writer. Pope utilizes different rhyme schemes to make his message clear and direct, and he also employs satire to convey his meaning.
Pope throughout his career used poetry as a great instrument for criticism and believed that satire was his most effective weapon to destroy corrupt customs and expose others. Satire is a genre of literature that uses humour, irony, exaggeration, or ridicule to expose and criticise someone or something. Although satire is meant to be humorous, its greater purpose is often constructive or not so constructive criticism, using wit to draw attention to issues in society. This extract of the epistle is Juvenalian satire, as it attacks an individual to expose hypocrisy and moral transgressions. Exaggeration, juxtaposition, comparison, analogy, and double entendre are all also frequently used in satirical writing. Pope embraces ironic juxtaposition when describing ordinary human beings in epic terms, such as referring to Lord Hervey as Sporus. Sporus was a young boy whom the Roman Emperor Nero had castrated and married. Comparing Hervey to Sporus achieves a desired comical effect. Pope also does this when referring to Hervey as an amphibious thing and states he has beauty that shocks you, parts that none will trust, wit that can creep, and pride that licks the dust. All these descriptions of Lord Hervey are not just ironic juxtaposition, but also exaggeration and hyperbole, another mode which brings us a satire piece. Pope's artistic writing gifts created a clever, subtle satire piece.
Alexander Pope's Epistle is a very strong example of the satire genre. In his writing, he uses the literary devices of imagery, allusion, rhyme scheme, and satire to assist in creating a memorial for his friendship with Dr Arbuthnot, and firmly delivers the message of Pope's moral outrage at his fellow fame-seeking writers. Thank you all for joining us today, and I hope to see you next week with a look into dramatic monologues.